Hello and welcome to Advantech Embedded Talk series. In this episode, we're going to interview a real expert of embedded security, who is the head of automotive business and partners of Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, the most popular Linux distribution in the world. I'm going to introduce Matthew Saracen in a minute, but first, I want to introduce my colleagues in Europe, Pascal von Kasteren, who is Business Development Manager of the EV charging sector in Europe. Pascal, I want to say hi to the audience.
Well, hi to the audience, and hi to you, Stephen, and hi to you, Mathieu.
Good.
EV, that's what I do.
Now, Matthew, thanks for joining us. Matthew, would you like to introduce yourself a bit and what you are doing in Ubuntu?
Thanks a lot for having me here. Thanks, Stephen. Good morning, Pascal. So my name is Mathieu Sarrazin. I'm the head of the automotive business and partnership at Canonical. And my role is to offer our customers the wide range of product Canonical has to offer to the automotive.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Now, to begin with, can you quickly introduce what Ubuntu is and why Ubuntu is special from other Linux distributions out there?
So Ubuntu refers to a product name and a trademark that are owned by Canonical. And Ubuntu is here referring to the most widely used Linux distribution. And the way it works, the way Ubuntu is composed, it's basically a set of open source packages that are selected by Canonical. And then from that set of packages, we are creating 3 different editions of Ubuntu. One is dedicated to servers, another one to desktop, and another one for IoT embedded devices. So we have Ubuntu Server, Ubuntu Desktop, and Ubuntu Core. That's the main 3 editions that we have. And with those 3 editions, we basically cover the entire compute spectrum, from servers to desktop to edge devices and embedded devices, including cars, including EV charging stations.
Great. That's very clear. Now, I suppose Ubuntu is widely used in a lot of energy equipment or EV charging infrastructure. Can you tell us a bit more about your experience or Ubuntu's use case in those applications?
Well, basically, we see a common behavior from our customers. They're turning to Ubuntu because they would like to develop something which is customer facing, like application functionalities, and solve a problem for their customers, while taking care of a Linux distribution is complicated and expensive for them. So rather than nailing it down their team onto maintaining and taking care of a Linux distribution, they've been using usually Ubuntu on desktops. They saw how easy it is to use, how functional it is, how good it is maintained over time. And they basically take the same solutions of choosing Ubuntu for their embedded devices to solve that base problem that otherwise they would have to solve by themselves.
Mathieu, can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
If it's EVSE, so EV, what is your, let's say, no, it's not the experience I'm looking for, but what is your view on how much of the market is using, let's say, Ubuntu/Linux solutions against any other OS that is around in the world?
So we don't have very precise market share details and statistics around. What I can tell you is that the Eclipse Foundation has been running a survey 1 year back or 2 years back. And from that survey, it turns out that the Ubuntu family is used in about 30% of the IoT devices. So that is not nailed down to EV charging stations in particular, but that gives an idea of the spectrum. And with that, it's the most used Linux distribution on IoT devices.
Got it. Matthew, you
Clear.
mentioned some challenges faced by the developers or manufacturers of those energy EV charging devices, equipment. Can you try to elaborate more about their challenges? For example, the maintenance of the Linux operating system.
The thing is, you can easily take a system based on Yocto and create a prototype. But the challenge comes when you need to deploy the prototype software into the field and give it to your customers. We've seen over the past few years the deployment of EV charging stations, and with that came a lot of vulnerabilities that have been discovered in the software, where hackers have been able to penetrate the EV charging network and do a lot of nasty things that should not exist. And this is a problem for not only the EV charger provider, but also the entire ecosystem, because then you end up in situations where hacked system will prevent the customer from being charged. So he's basically charging his car for free without paying for that. There will be some disruption of the network, which could be putting one network in default while another one will be beneficial of that situation. There's a lot of things like that. And it's complex for the company to cover all those use cases and investigate that. And that's where Ubuntu is providing that a solution to the network, to the people, to the customers, because Ubuntu is so much used worldwide in many areas. And as I said, it's based on a common set of packages, that we have a security team that is looking at all the vulnerabilities that have been discovered and apply some patches on those on a regular basis. The usual cycle of security patches is around 3 weeks, every 3 weeks. And we are supporting versions of Ubuntu for up to 10 years, sometimes a bit more in some industries. But it means that we have 5 versions of the LTS version of Ubuntu maintained in parallel all the time. And we apply about 1,000 fixes per year on each of those. So that gives you an idea of the volume that you need to handle if you would do it yourself. Another thing I wanted to add, because it's pretty recent, I don't know if you've seen that, but there's been an announcement made which tells that the kernel, the Linux kernel maintenance is going to be reduced in the future down to 2 years only. So that means that the people that will try to maintain a Linux distribution they do by themselves will be in even more big troubles, because the kernel itself will only be maintained by the community for 2 years. So if your product is meant to last more than 2 years, then you will have to maintain the kernel by yourself, which is a huge amount of lines of code, a huge amount of investigation.
I see. That's very clear.
Yeah.
So, although Ubuntu is indeed a free open source operating system, but if you want to get maintenance service, then it's better to go with Ubuntu long-term support for better security.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly.
But how do your engineers find out and discover those vulnerabilities or CVEs in the first place, and how are you going to amend them? Are you going to know the vulnerabilities ahead of the community, ahead of the world, all the developers?
Yes, that's part of it. There are things that we're doing on our side to investigate the vulnerabilities, but there's also, thanks to our position on the market, there's also a lot of the vulnerabilities that we know from the community. So the CVEs, the common vulnerability and exposures, are listed on a worldwide database. And the first stage for those vulnerabilities, when they are discovered, they are put under an embargo. So they are just listed with a number, but you don't have the details. And because Ubuntu is so widely used, we have our team that is contacted most of the time to work on a solution for a given CVE. So they get access. They are part of the few having access to the details of a given CVE, and they can work with the community or internally in some cases to fix that problem and that vulnerability. And then when the vulnerability is released and available to the community, usually most of our customers already got a patch delivered to cover that. So it means that our customers that are subscribing to the long-term support and the Ubuntu Pro offering we have the patches for their system often before the CVE is given to the public, is made public.
Hey, Pascal, you've been working with all those developers or EV charging charger makers, if I can put it this way. How many of them are aware of the challenges or the risks of those vulnerabilities, and how many of them are already investing in the maintenance of operating systems? Do they have the capacity, or at least do they
Well,
have the
the maintenance.
awareness of the situation?
It depends a little bit on where you're looking for, Stephen. You have, let's say, the wall box AC market, which is your home plug in the wall where you can charge a car. You have the DC, let's say, community, which is fast charging. I think that if you look into the market and you look into the history of this market, until let's say not so long ago, EV was not so widely spread. So I think that from a safety point of view, it was not so interesting for hackers or anyone who want to do something wrong to play with it. And what you see now is we are getting to the situation where the assets are in the market. It becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Now it becomes really interesting to make sure that you have a safe environment. So I think that from a customer perspective, let's say the safety aspect in the past was not so much, it's always of interest, but not so much an issue. But these days it is. You see also, let's say, governments now starting to interfere, wanting to know exactly how much money is going to be paid. That there's no cybersecurity stuff. And intrusions are going to be there. So legislation is now following. Legislation is always, let's say, slower than the products go to the market. That's what happens. So I think that on the Ubuntu side and on the OS side, I guess that Mathieu gets a lot more questions and vulnerabilities in the last, let's say, 2 or 3 years than before, just because the market is now, let's say, starting to explode.
Thank you for the very insightful observation. And speaking of legislation or the many new standards about cybersecurity, Matthew, do you have any experience in helping customers or advising them to comply with all those new security standards, for example, like IEC 62443, things like that? Does Ubuntu play a role in meeting those criteria set out by those new policies or standards?
Absolutely. So we're working with customers. Usually that's the customer that is certifying the full product, but we are providing the building blocks to ensure that it can be compliant with those type of cybersecurity standards. There are several standards that exist, from pure automotive vehicles to EV charging to industrial equipment and so on. So usually we provide the blocks for the layer that we provide, and that's where the value of having the CVE patching that we provide with Ubuntu, that's where it helps our customer getting the final grant for the certification, the final approval.
In your opinion, what is the best strategy or the best solution from Ubuntu to meet the very complicated requirements by those security standards? For example, there are different SKUs or different versions of Ubuntu. There's Ubuntu Desktop, which is quick starter, which is easy, which comes with your hardware shipment, for example. But there are some other alternatives out there.
Yeah, so as I explained at the beginning, we have 3 different editions of Ubuntu, with one that is dedicated to embedded devices or IoT devices. So to the question, which one is the best fit for this market, definitely Ubuntu Core would be the best fit. To explain exactly why, I would need to explain a bit about the snaps. So the snaps is a packaging system. Debian is another packaging system, and we supplemented Debian to create the snaps to get a bit more detail about what is inside the package. And the reason we did that is initially for our own needs. We have to maintain, if you think about a desktop, if you think about a web browser, the web browser needs to be maintained across different versions of Ubuntu. And we are on a business where a lot of the people that are using Ubuntu are using it on a device that we haven't seen. If you think about the desktops, for instance, people are going on canonical Ubuntu website, they are downloading Ubuntu, installing on the desktop. We haven't seen their desktop, right? Still, we will need to make sure that Ubuntu works well on the desktop environment and that the web browser also works well, even though it might be a different version of Ubuntu. To achieve that, we made the web browser into a snap. That was much easier for us to maintain that. Now, if I put the parallel into the EV world, the charging stations and so on, think about you have an application that is providing advertisement, that is providing payment methods, or any sort of type of application you want to develop on your charging station. At the end of the day, you will end up in your charging network to have different types of hardware because you have different size of charging stations. You may have different revision of your hardware. You may even have an hardware that is running on an Intel x86 or on an ARM platform. And you will have that variety of hardware in your network. But still, your payment application or your advertising application may not be different. You want it to be the same, but you will need to maintain it. So that's the reason why snaps would add value on your application level. And we push that concept of the snap to go down to the OS itself, and we put the OS into a snap. And the value of putting the OS into a snap is similar, is that we can update the OS without having to update everything. And we have a much more granular way to update your system and protect your system, because then we can check that everything is set up correctly, is signed correctly before executing. So that prevents entry point for an attacker to be able to replace something on your system. If it's not signed correctly, it won't execute. And if there is an update that fails, there is automatic rollback that is available on Ubuntu Core that also makes sure that your system is fully functional all the time. So that's the reason why Ubuntu Core would be a much better fit, or the best fit, from the Ubuntu editions to the EV charging networks and solutions.
Cool.
So Mathieu, when do you decide, let's say, on functionality in the Ubuntu, let's say, delivery? Because I guess you're not only talking to the EVSE manufacturers, you're also most probably talking to, let's say, payment providers, or well, it's the ecosystem is bigger than only, let's say, the charging station. So how does that work? Because I can imagine that everyone somewhere down the line asks for the same kind of stuff. And when you want to do a payment, there is always this connection to be made to the provider. There are not so many providers around. How does that work? Are you also in connection with those kind of, let's say, parties?
So the network of people we interact with and the partners is really wide. We have partners that are software providers that have their own solution that they sell and that is running on Linux and in particular on Ubuntu. And we're not trying to replace what they do. They're doing their software. It's great software. They can get it certified. They can negotiate with the bank to make sure that it's approved by the banks and so on. We are working with them to make sure that their solution is working well on Ubuntu, that the combination of the two is great. And we have a division on our side that is making sure that those software providers, we create the right relationship with them so that we can go to the EVSE, for instance, and provide a wide range of solutions so that they can pick and choose, like they can have some functionalities on a desktop that they want to enable or disable, the similar kind of thing with a full ecosystem. So part of the solutions would be open source solutions that are available for the protocols that you have between the charging station and the CPO and the others. And some other solutions might be private solutions. And then our customers using Ubuntu can decide if they prefer that option A or that option B.
Clear.
That's very clear.
I was already expecting something like that, but just to make sure that. So, but somewhere down the line, you decide together with your customers in the way that you work together. Listen, this is now, let's say, more private situation, but everyone is more or less using the same thing. We are going to incorporate it into the core. I guess that stuff happens.
Yes, exactly. We're trying to offer the common ground to everyone. There's one thing that is interesting as well, is that we saw a trend where customers are not only using Linux. Means Linux is great, Ubuntu is great, but sometimes they need something else and they would like to use some other open source solutions. And what we created is an offering which is named Ubuntu Pro, which is basically providing you the support and maintenance for a full bunch of open source solutions. So we are incorporating those packages which are not formally part of the Linux OS, but are running on top of Linux OS to give the customer the support and maintenance for those packages. So that includes.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, yes, I was going to that. So there's many. I can't list all of them, but you would have Kafka, you would have Grafana, you would have Postgres, a lot of those. The full list is more than 20,000 packages, so it's really huge. But we saw the need for the customers to basically create their solution on top of open source solutions, because they saw that as a way to manage the innovation and to sit on innovation and develop faster on their side. And they wanted to have one point of contact for open source because it's easier for them to purchase this way, because otherwise they would need to understand who is the supporter of Kafka, who is the supporter of Grafana, where do I find proper support and the CVEs fixes for PostgreSQL or whatever open source you name it. Each time it's the same question: who is behind this open source solution? Who can provide me support? Where do I get maintenance? Can I make sure that I got the CVEs fixed? It's an headache for our customers. So that's the offering with Ubuntu Pro, is to solve that problem.
So at first, when I thought of Ubuntu Core, I thought you were trying to, lure your customers into a proprietary environment, try to migrate everything into Snap into a very new format or form factor, something like that. But now I realize that you are actually facilitating more applications, or you are enabling more open source applications for the customers.
Exactly. Again, we started Snaps because of our own needs, and we think it's beneficial for our customers as well. So that's the reason why we created that. And we are not closing the door, we are rather opening it, because the snaps are available on many distributions. We made them available so that people can run snaps application on competitors' Linux distribution as well. So we're rather trying to open an ecosystem where people can trust that this application is going to run correctly on Linux, and that it will bring what you want as a value as a developer.
Got it. Well, that's very enlightening to me. And I want to try to echo to what you're doing by explaining what Advantech is doing to enable or to facilitate this whole process. Well, you know that we design and manufacture different types of computing platform embedded systems. And we want to make sure that our customers get the best experience in using Ubuntu. So we would test and verify over 500 items for every hardware model, and even send it to Ubuntu's lab in Taiwan for testing, verification, and long-term support. All of these is to make sure that everything is fully compatible, everything is updated, and our customers have no trouble in starting their projects on Ubuntu. And with that, I would like to conclude today's interview. Thank you very much indeed again for Pascal and Matthew. I think we all learn a bit of new things from each other. And if you want to know more about Advantech's offerings for EV charging infrastructure, you can click the link below the video and get more information on our embedded hardware, software, and security solutions. Once again, thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Pascal.
Thank you.
Have a nice
Thank
one.
you.